All right, so everyone, welcome to our fifth episode on our webinar series. I'm very pleased to be hosting today, and the topic for today's webinar will be innovation stories, circular innovation stories. And yeah, this is the fifth episode of our webinar series. And I just want to welcome everyone to please use the chat, briefly introduce yourself. It can be anything from where you study, what you do, to if you're engaged in any relevant project to sustainability or circularity, we'll be more than happy to hear about it. So please remember to use the chat function as well as the Q&A. And my co-host Rita will be scrolling through the chat and listening to also answering whatever is possible, and whatever question you have to our presentations or to DANSIC, please feel free to post them. We will tackle them at some point. So DANSIC stands for the Danish Social Innovation Club, and we are a non-for-profit student-led organization for both constituted by students and recent graduates. And our background is both international and national, meaning that we not only have a diverse group in terms of our interdisciplinary backgrounds, but also in terms of cultures. So at DANSIC this year, we are around 26 volunteers. And really the organization's mission is just to, and vision is to inspire and serve as a point of conjuncture for diverse societal organizations, whether it is the business, the political sphere, or the civil society sphere. And yeah, so here in the next slide, you will see our amazing team of volunteers for this year. And this is the DANSIC team. So from finance to HR, a big shout out to you guys for all the work that you put in our organization. And what is very distinctive about DANSIC is that every year we do a distinct event. So this year we decided to do a case competition, which we named the Circular Challenge. And DANSIC21's distinct event is a case solving event for which students will have up to 72 hours to read a case, find some solutions, and submit a presentation. And basically, we decided to make this about circularity since we are focused on the topic of social innovation. We thought it would be interesting to make a fully digital event, and therefore we created this case competition. So who is this competition for? So this competition is both for recent graduates or people who are currently enrolled in either a Nordic or African university. And the reason why we keep it so broad is so we can really reach people from different disciplines, and so as to really bring forth some solutions that are come from all sides of society and not just only one field, for example. And don't worry, if you want to sign up for our circular challenge, you can do so in teams of either 2 to 4 participants per team. And if you don't have any team members right now, we can also help you match into a team. So please feel free to check it out. Check all the information about our case competition on dansic.innoflow.io. And it's not only for signing up. Here you will also find all kinds of relevant information, such as our rule book and our promo video and more in-depth information about the competition. And so jumping into the agenda for today, we will first have a presentation by Mark. He will talk about Kombuccino and the work that he does in Kombuccino and his role as Mag Fermenters. So Mag here, he is an entrepreneur, but he's also a chef and a fermenter, which works with imperfect products and trying to give them a second life and really use this process of fermentation as a way to create new inputs. And therefore, he has this very, very cool circular business that he will tell us all about. And after Mac's presentation, we will dive into the topic of stories, and from the perspective of Big Circle Studios, by Kiera, Crowe, and Matthew Edwards. They will talk about their work in their Parlab Power Studio, a non-for-profit organization based in South Africa. They will talk about the perspective of the continent and basically how some of the practices that are inherent in cultures across the African continent really serve as a very good foundation for building a circular model and scale it. So without further ado, please, Mark, the floor is yours. And please, everyone, feel free to use the chat and we'll keep the conversation going.
Great. Thank you, Valeria, and hi everyone. I'm really hyped to be here as well. So let me just also jump directly to presentation. Here we are. Okay, so as you heard and maybe saw on the website, I am the owner of the Kombuccino project. But because of the overall theme of this of the whole event, I decided to share a few broader examples, or just a few more examples from Denmark, because I think it's worth noting that projects like mine are not just exceptions. There are many other people who are actually thinking in circular way and trying to approach food waste or the bio waste in similar manners. So yes, feel free to ask questions and feel free to comment in the chat, and we're gonna have a short Q&A session after my presentation as well. So here's what I'm gonna tell you about today. Exactly, that's a short introduction about myself and my history. Then I'm gonna show you a few examples from the food world, and talk about this great organization called Circular Coffee Community, which part of Kombuccino is as well. So yeah, so I am a chef, that's true, and also a fermenter. I'm the guy to the right, actually the tall one. Since last, I believe, 8 years, I've been traveling and working as a chef in different countries and on different continents. And for last 5 years, I've been fermenting, and it all started actually there in Panama. It actually started all in New Zealand. Then I worked a bit in Poland, where I'm originally from. I went to Central America, US, Sweden, and then I ended up here in Denmark. But it all started, my journey with fermentation started in Panama, where my head chef asked me to ferment, to pasteurize the banana vinegar he was making. And I had no idea what pasteurization means even. And that's exactly where I got hooked up on the whole process and the microbial world. So I focus on growing mold, and this is mold grown on koji. It's used for making different applications like soy sauce or miso, and that's something I specialize with in right now. But not only. But that's just me. I'm a fermentation freak or geek. I really like doing it on a daily basis, and it makes me happy. But now let's jump to the gastro reality we live in. So out of 700,000 tons of food wasted, 5% comes from hospitality, which equals or around 35,000 tons of food being thrown away every year. And it's a very big problem that some companies actually approach in a very healthy, conscious way. So first example is a company called Eat Green. It's a company that actually collect imperfect, due date, not so nice vegetables and fruits, and sell them as a package, as a subscription package to people who don't mind those imperfections, because food is still food. And they become very big here in Denmark. Yeah, so that's number one. The other example is Too Good To Go. I don't know if you heard about this one, but Too Good To Go focuses on making food bags full of pastry that was not sold on the same day at bakeries or supermarkets, so that you actually have a bag full of bread or pastry or other sweet treats for a fraction of its price. And now another thing is the movement called Farm to Fork, and that's something strictly related to restaurants and restaurateurs. And it is a combination of few activities. One of them is focusing on products that actually come from around the region. The products that are very local. And for example, this guy, his name is Christian Puglisi. He actually made the whole farm. It's called Farm of Ideas. That provides him and his restaurants. He has a bunch of them with actual products for the dishes, including he has some milking cows and he has some cheese production as well. And the second way of implementing the farm to fork ideas is or could be urban farming. That's called also, that's very micro local idea, local focus on providing yourself or your restaurant organization with products. And that's actually a restaurant on very nearby where I am right now that makes a lot of fruits and vegetables on the rooftop of a very old building. And they have a lot of events. They're pretty cool. Now, there's a restaurant called Amas that made, this is a photo from 2013. They made their own garden in the backyard of the restaurant. And 6 years later, it looked like this. It's actually an open space where everybody can come and hang out and have their wine or picnic as well. But many of these products that grow there, herbs and small fruits, actually end up on the plates as well. And then we're also proud to have restaurant Noma here. It's one of the best restaurants in the world that also implement the combination of these two. So they are actually using producers they're using local producers, and they're also growing their own herbs and vegetables. They also have a dedicated fermentation program that is a part of what you have on the plate later on. They also focus on seasonality a lot. So the menu that they offer is very much related to which time of the year it is. And now there's a term called zero waste. In my opinion, nothing can really be 100% zero waste, but many restaurants are actually chasing the idea of limiting and reducing the waste, the food waste, to the extent as much as possible, and being conscious about using everything possible, including carrot peels or vegetable peels and offcuts and whatnot. So we're going back to Restaurant Amas. This is Matt Orlando, who is a owner and a head chef there. And he, in his restaurant, implemented a few programs that are all focusing on this zero waste approach. And in the garden, they have a greenhouse that has hydroponic vertical, how we call it, vertical hydroponic garden, where they grow the plants. And actually, it's a very circular way of reusing water as well. As you can see here in the bottom right, there's a small pond where there are two carp fish that fertilize the water that goes back to the circle and keep flowing in the whole thing. And then Matt is also focusing on the worm program, where he actually cultivates worms that fertilize the earth the soil that they use in the garden later. He actually make the like a tea from the cascars, from the like a worm poop. He makes a decoction out of it, and he sprays it directly to the leaves of the flowers that he himself says that is like heroin shot for a human. I don't know about this comparison, but apparently it makes vegetables grow like crazy. And then there's another example. It's a restaurant Silo. It's actually from UK, but it's very interesting case because it's the very first restaurant that is, well, they claim themselves 100% zero waste. In the whole kitchen, they have only one bin. And as you can see, I can read it out loud as well. The mission for Silo is to serve nutrient-dense food made from scratch using primitive, proven preparation methods, only using produce sourced from ethical growers that practice methods that encourage healthy soil and biodiversity. All this without generating waste. So yeah, they actually, Douglas McMaster, the owner and head chef, he released this book called The Zero Waste Blueprint. And it's very interesting how he shows in it how the industrial system on the left is converted into his silo system, where everything that comes from nature technically is being processed and goes back to nature. With exception to glass, like natural wines they get from France, it comes in glass that cannot be really reused, other than they crush it, make sand out of it, and then from the sand they recreate the porcelain tails, plates and whatnot, and they sell it or use it in the restaurant themselves. And so their whole system is focusing on the creative output. They're trying to utilize as much as possible in many ways. And they succeeded in a way that they were able to create a whole menu for the whole year from just focusing on zero waste or focusing on sustainable activity. And now I'm going to jump to another part and talk a little about Circular Coffee Community, which is a initiative organized by one of the biggest coffee roasteries here in Denmark. And it's a project gathering small startups or bigger companies that actually make some product or solution out of coffee waste in any form. So you can imagine that anything that can become a cleaning or food product or a beauty product, and even more, is actually part of Circular Coffee Community. And now a few examples of that. First is Café Bueno, which is a company that actually press coffee grounds, coffee leftovers, and extract oil out of it. And this oil, as you can see on the graph here, so the spent ground comes to their company, and they extract it and make personal care products and also a few food products, but mostly they focus on this oil. So they also have the flour and the fiber that can be used in other personal care applications. Then there is Beyond Coffee. Beyond Coffee is a project that we use coffee grounds as well to make substrate for growing mushrooms, and then they sell it in nice packages that you can grow mushrooms at home yourself. So they're allowing you to grow pink and white oyster mushrooms as well as lion's mane, and their packages look more or less like that. Well, exactly like that. And now the next example is A-Grain. A-Grain is a company focusing on reusing brewers' spent, so brewing leftovers from whiskey and beer brewing, and they offer in their portfolio. They also have they have flour, they have granola, chips, and crackers that are all edible food products. Yes, and now let me tell you about what I was supposed to tell you about in the first place, which is Kombuccino. So Kombuccino is my baby project, part of Mac Ferments, and it is something that actually came out of the first lockdown we had in March 2020, last year. Because back then I was able to focus all my attention on fermenting at home. And out of this happened that I had a lot of kombucha made. Kombucha, for you who don't know, is a fermented tea drink, a non-alcoholic fermented tea drink. And I was making a lot of it, and I had so many bottles of it that one day I decided that I will put a crate of kombucha on my balcony. I live on the ground floor. And just put a sign saying that whoever wants it can have it, and just send me a small amount of money for it, or bring the bottle back. And you know what? I started selling out every day. Well, not every day, but like twice a week I did it, and I've been selling out, literally. So I was very grateful for that, and that came as a signal that people are really interested in this kind of products, and I can easily find actual demand for what I'm doing. But it didn't come without struggle, because one of my favorite ones was coffee kombucha, given that it's very nice and nutty, chocolatey in flavor. It's also made from coffee grounds, coffee leftover, which I really liked the idea itself. So like I say, I was making a lot of it, and I decided to perfect the recipe for the coffee kombucha. It didn't come without hurdle. There were a few trials that didn't go well. I had to throw or pour down some good liters of coffee kombucha that was not that tasty. But eventually I found a perfect recipe, and I made coffee kombucha from leftovers that tasted delicious. Befriended bar actually started using it on the menu with the cocktails. So I was very happy with all the response and feedback that it actually achieved. Now, I wanted to push the boundaries a little more, and I wanted to see what else can I do when I'm using the coffee grounds, coffee leftovers. And I figured that I can use the buckets that are normally used for big amounts of, I don't know, mayonnaise or creme fraiche or oil in restaurants. And I can recycle them from these restaurants, clean them, delabel, and use them as fermentation vessels, like buckets just for brewing kombucha. And I can also, for bottling, stop buying new bottles, but reach out to wine shops and wine bars and actually ask them to collect all these champagne bottles for me that, again, I would recycle, clean, delabel, or relabel, and make a beautiful probiotic product. So that's how the whole business model was born, and that's the whole core idea of what Kombuccino, how Kombuccino works. We start from the left top, where small cafes or restaurants or hotel lobbies, they make a lot of coffee that the leftovers are being collected in a bucket provided by us. And then there are two options. We can brew the kombucha for the company, or the company can brew the kombucha on the spot with the equipment that we provide. So these two are the selling points of Kombuccino. One is the lease of the equipment for brewing it on the spot, and the other is outsourcing the fermentation processes and getting the final product, coffee kombucha, back to the restaurant or cafe where the coffee grounds were provided from. In practice, it looks sometimes like this. So as a prototype, we asked one cafe to actually collect the grounds, and this is after, I believe, 3 or 4 days. They had over 15 kilo of coffee grounds for us. And now, how fermentation process goes is that we rebrew or brew again a coffee on these coffee grounds, just pour hot water over, and let it become a kind of weak coffee. Then we strain it, add sugar, and add the starter. The starter is called SCOBY. It's symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, and it's in the form of a small jellyfish, so to say. that initiates the process of fermentation. Now, added on top of the sweet coffee decoction, after a week or so, it grows to something that is not very nice to see. It's not very yummy thing, but that's the SCOBY that grew, that creates a natural layer, the natural lid that prevents oxygen from coming to the liquid, and everything underneath the SCOBY just ferments and creates the complex flavor and also slight carbonation to the product. So like I said, it doesn't look good, but it does good things to our drink. It's edible, it's just not edible. If you know, it's not dangerous, but it's, and like I say, we recycle these big buckets. These are 5-liter buckets, but restaurants use even bigger ones, and then bottles, from half a liter bottles to even Magnum 1.2-liter bottles. And there we are. We have a beautiful drink that was found to be interesting as a product and as a model. I actually got a fund, the scholarship from microgrant company, microgrant organization here, that was able to push my project further. So just coming back to how the whole model looks like, that's what circularity in terms of coffee kombucha looks like for me. Now, what happened since the idea initiated is that I had a soft coming out on the 21st of February during the World Kombucha Day. We're still in the lockdown, but this one befriended bar allowed me to make this coming out with a giveaway of coffee kombucha samples, and also we made some cocktails with the coffee kombucha. So we made, I believe, 50 packages that people came and picked up, and they got to listen about the origins of the project and what's the goals and how it all looks like and tastes like. Yeah, so that's Kombuccino. And now I want to say that comparing to those other startups, or they're not startups anymore, but comparing it to Beyond Coffee or Café Bueno, the difference is that Kombuccino is focusing on those small cafes and allowing them to be included in the whole circularity theme to reuse the coffee grounds, because big companies, they need a lot of coffee grounds that a small cafe cannot provide on weekly basis. They need like hundreds of kilo every week to be provided to make their business model work. Here, it's actually very easy for any cafe or small restaurant to implement the whole solution and get themselves going. And there are some more benefits. Well, apart from the fact that kombucha is a healthy fermented beverage, it also is something that expands the portfolio of the cafe, because nowadays cafes are not only about selling coffee. It's about the moments, it's about the gifts, it's about those other things like brewing things or small kettles or, you know, the pour overs and whatnot, accessories. So Kombuccino can be a part of it. And it's also a way of stimulating the employees. People who work at the cafe can learn new things, learn how to ferment, learn how to make something out of a food waste, and think in the circular sustainable categories. Yeah. So right now, because of the lockdowns, my hands are pretty tight, and I wasn't able really to talk to many cafes because for some reason they did not answer and they were closed for last quite a long time. But we got the prototype, and the business model is, the business model is constantly evolving with the response from the market. We did a small market research and actually clinched a small kitchen in the other side of the city where we will be brewing kombucha ourselves and making other ferments. So now the goal is to find one sort of guinea pig that, just one cafe that will allow us to test the idea and how it works in reality and how it can be improved and then implemented and sold or leased on a bigger scale. Yeah, and I think that's all that I wanted to tell you guys. So now if you have any questions or comments, just go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mike, for the presentation. I really enjoy this approach to circularity within the hospitality, because I think it's like a huge question mark for the whole circular movement to really tackle that, because it's very much a waste-based industry, if I can define it like that. So it creates a lot of waste and is based on a service. So I think it was very interesting that you gave us an insight into how circularity can actually work within this field. And I saw a lot of questions were posted. I'm just gonna start with this one in relation to your ever-evolving business model. One attendee asked, I hear you can create other things with the SCOBY, like leather and such. Are you looking into these opportunities?
I just lost you. Here you are. Yeah, it's true. It's possible to reuse SCOBY in other ways, and other companies do that. I don't do it. I am always happy to share my SCOBYs because it's a byproduct of brewing kombucha, and you will only get more and more of it. With every brew, you have another layer of it, and it's something that, well, you can collect it, or you can give it to friends or not, or whoever. I actually like to bury it. It's not a very healthy thing to do, but I like to bury it in sugar and kind of cure it. The structure changes, the texture of the SCOBY changes into an edible product. And I really enjoyed that as a treat on any other sweets. It is true that some companies are experimenting with making SCOBY leather as well, and making wallets and bags and other accessories out of it. I personally don't do it, but it is a big field and very something that could be definitely explored in the long term.
And another question that we have is that I think it's also like something that you immediately think of. It's about food safety when working with the Second Life biodegradable inputs. So someone here is asking, do you have any quality tests of the coffee beans that you use? So you're sure it's okay to use those as your input for kombucha?
No, I do not have any. There's no such thing that I know that we can do, but it's a very good point because it's important that Second Life products that are due date or are actually close to being, off. Mm-hmm. We don't see the bacteria with our eyes, and some bacteria are there always. And it's important to make sure that actually these products are safe for processing, that the outcome of the fermentation, for example, will not be dangerous for human. So that's something that has to be considered definitely when you deal with food products to make sure that we don't create foodborne illnesses of any kind.
And I would like to just take one more question. The rest, I think, Mike, you can answer some of those also by typing on the Q&A function. Yeah. But I would like to ask the next question also, something that myself are thinking, because you say this business model works mainly because it's focused on the small coffee shops that can give you this coffee. Then first of all, how do you ensure that what you are producing from these collected beans can be standardized or have a specific quality to it? Because if you pick up from 50 different small coffee shops, I'm assuming it will taste differently. And second to that, how can you then scale this internationally? Also thinking about the fact that you focus on small providers of this input for your model.
Mm-hmm. Sure, these are very good questions. When it comes to the quality, it's actually an advantage of using coffee grounds from at a certain cafe will create a product slightly different than the one to the cafe next door, because coffee grounds differ in flavor and taste as well. But it's something good. It's something that they can implement in their storytelling. It's something that they can say, well, this is made from our coffee beans and it tastes like our coffee, or close to what our coffee tastes. But when it comes to the actual quality, not only flavor profile of the product, it is based on my assistance, on actually helping them with the first and second brew, depending on the package that they want to work with us. We can always help them and make sure that the fermentation process goes as it should. They are going to be trained to do it themselves, but if they are unsure, obviously we should guarantee them help and assistance with that. Also because of food safety reasons. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to scaling up, it is not really easy or feasible to scale it internationally. It is more a product or a solution that focuses on local producers. It is very nice to show it in other cities around the country, but it really requires this human touch. It's not something that you can automatize and let people be, because the whole supply chain focuses on other stakeholders. It's not that we can just email some restaurant and tell them that someone will pick up the buckets or the wine bottles and at this time, at a certain time. And no, it's actually about making connection, human connection with other people and other companies. So it's something that gives it more of a soul, more character of mm-hmm. a human enterprise.
All right. Thank you very much for. I think we need to move on into UX Circle Studios presentation. But thank you so much, Mark. And you can stick around. I think some of the questions are general, and we will take them at the very end. So if you want to stick around, Mark, please do so. And thank you very much for really talking about your experience with circularity and your different projects. And wish you the best of luck. A lot of activity on the chat, giving you recommendations and all kinds of ideas, and people want to try it. So best of luck with your different projects.
That's great. And, thank you.
You're so welcome. So now for our second presentation, we'll have Matthew and Kiera presenting. They're gonna focus on circular cases that they themselves has researched and mapped. You can find a very, very cool sort of like mapping of the circular stories on the Big Circle Studios page, actually. And well, they're gonna talk about the different cases and some really, really cool approach that I think you guys really, really enjoy is how the actually the heritage of certain regional practices can actually be useful because they are already circular. And they're gonna talk all about that now, but I really wanna welcome Kiera and Matthew to please kick it off, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, hey. Noah, I mean, nice to see you all, and Matthew will share a presentation now so we can kind of discuss a little bit further what Valeria is talking about, but we're very happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Valeria. And thank you, Mac. That was a brilliant presentation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Right. So, we've gone too far. Can't actually see half of this, but yeah, circularity stories. This is quite an interesting one for Kiera and I to be tasked with because we come from the south of Africa. We both live in Johannesburg, South Africa, and we've started a design research studio that focuses on sort of intersectional environmentalism in a way that introduces the community to theories around design, but also we learn from people through workshops and basically learning together. So this is our, oops, sorry. Yeah, there we go. So this is who we are. We formed in 2020, but we've been talking about these ideas for quite a while, both based in Johannesburg, South Africa. And we started Big Circle because of a mutual frustration for our wasteful society, essentially. And our backgrounds are slightly different. Kiera is in research and I'm in design. So we thought it would be great for us to team up and see how we could have a research and data heavy approach to design and create this sort of very understandable, but also, like solutions that make sense to people. You can back them up. So yeah, so as I said earlier, we focus on sort of intersectional environmentalism, making sure that there's a social element to what we're looking at too. And we're not just designing goods for beautiful products' sake or materials' sake. We're also engaging with how the society works around that product. And then contextual relevance is of huge importance to us. So how does what we do fit into the society that we live in, and looking at those nuances within the society that we live in. So we see ourselves as prototypers, creative scientists, and design researchers. So Kiera, if you want to introduce yourself a bit further.
Yeah, I'm Kiera Crowe Pettersson. I'm an environmental design researcher, as Matthew said, with a background in development research as well. Yeah, I think that a lot of what Matthew said covers kind of the basis of what we do. I think that one of the most important focuses through our intersectional environmentalism is that we kind of also join with kind of community-led design and community-driven design. So we really try our hardest to tap into what's going on with the people and the community around us, and then work from that point forward, and try and be as kind of, sensitive and empathetic to that space as possible, really focusing on human-centered design as a parallel to environmental design as well.
Yeah, and then my background is I'm an industrial designer, sort of schooled in Johannesburg, and I believe in the ideas of make do and ad hocism, so making with what we've got around us. So like very close proximity, making with materials that are around us, finding inspiration with what's around us, and that sort of was my entry into circularity. So moving on, I'm just going to take you through some of our projects that we've been working on recently, and Kiera is going to go ahead with material topographies.
Yeah, so we're just running through our ongoing projects, and one of our kind of main projects that's rolling out pretty soon is called material topographies. Basically, we're looking with this project at creating some deeper connections with what we call in Johannesburg reclaimers, which might be known more colloquially as informal waste pickers. So the community members that we have in Johannesburg who move through the city and take waste out of people's home rubbish, and then they sort them for people, because we don't have a formal separation at source system like I'm sure you guys have in Copenhagen or elsewhere. This methodology basically is a informalized response to a lack of waste reclamation. And so what we envisioned with this project was trying to find a way to give a more visual interpretation and visual explanation of how significant the work that these waste reclaimers do in our communities. I'm sure that the same could be done for formal waste reclaimers in the rest of the world, but because there's such a sensitivity towards the fact that they're informal, they're unprotected, they don't have a labor union in all these words in all the more kind of like concrete ways that we understand them to have. It means that these people are really exposed and sensitive in the way that they work. So sometimes they are victims of assault because people really don't understand why they do this work. They also receive a really shockingly low pay for the work that they do. So to put it in context, for 1 kilogram of HDPE plastic, which is one of the most solid, I'd imagine that maybe you guys know, but it's like for instance, the plastic that bleach bottles come in, they receive around 2 krona for that, and for a kilo of that, and they might spend half a day finding just a kilo of that. So the actual effort for the effort to income ratio is really, really low, and the effort for impact ratio is also really, really low. So basically what we were looking at through this is tracking 5 reclaimers over 5 days and seeing not only just the space that they cover, but also we also asked them to journal, to diarize how much they earned each day, what kind of emotional response they had or physical response they had to each day, because like anyone, we all have, some days are great at work, some days are shitty. We go through different modalities in how we respond to our work every day. And I think that because their work is so physically demanding, it's even more so. And basically this project has culminated in a series of maps, which you can see in the left-hand side, that basically show the significant area that they all cover. Just 5 people cover, a really huge area, and they're all, they're all working only on their feet. They don't have cars or anything. Yeah, sorry, Maddie. And so we just wanted to kind of express that in a more kind of sensory way for other people to be able to engage with. And the unfortunate thing is that these stories that we're able to tell in Johannesburg, just responding to Maria or William in the chat, is that this isn't an uncommon thing in the rest of the world. I mean, outside of formalized waste systems. But the fact of the matter is that because of these informal waste systems, the rate of recycling in Johannesburg is actually much higher than it is in Copenhagen or in Stockholm, because these people are dealing with it firsthand. They're actually taking the waste and delivering it directly to the people who process it. So it kind of shortens the cycle of waste reclamation in a really meaningful way. Matt will deal with the next one.
Yeah, fantastic. Our next project is Future Matters, and this is a project that's kicked off about a week ago, which is very exciting. And it's a grant-funded project looking at community-driven transitions to the circular economy through biomaterial exploration. And we don't mean biomaterial in the medical sense. We mean biomaterial in creating new material composites through biological waste, essentially. So this is looking at how we can basically intercept food waste or things like ash from fires. It's winter in the southern hemisphere at the moment, so materials that have certain pertinence in our society, and how we can turn them into valuable biomaterials that could replace single-use plastics or not single-use plastics. So this is going to be a very interesting project where we explore a wide range of recipes. It's in partnership with a London-based lab and research company called Materium, who I would definitely recommend checking out. They have an open source library of material recipes that everybody can try at home, from very basic ones to ones that need more of a lab setting. But feel free to go check that out. It's quite a lot of fun to see things that we are consuming regularly turning into quite interesting biomaterials. The end goal of this project is to have a series of workshops with the community so that we can learn to create contextually relevant biomaterial recipes to add to the research gap, because there's not much happening in South Africa in terms of biomaterial research, as well as then trying to develop products from these to basically scale up the biomaterial sphere in South Africa to potentially become economically viable. Another project which is very similar to that is material transitions. also ongoing, and that is the creation of the press behind me, or rather the hacking of the press behind me, as you can see in the photo. Basically, we're trying to create a system for pressing biomaterials to create products. This is one of our first tests, which is a activated charcoal cup. So looking at how we can, and it's very dark, I don't know if you can see inside it, but how we can create materials and viable products that use varying materials and waste streams from different sort of sources. As I said earlier, we see ourselves as prototypers, so we're not looking to establish a business model or perfect these, but instead research and then create an open source library for people to experiment with and then take the information further. This project is sort of based on the thinking of Dave Huckins, Dutch founder of One Army. Their project Beyond Plastic sort of has a similar motive, and we took a lot of reference and inspiration from that.
Yeah, sorry, before I move on to this, just to touch on what Matt was speaking about. I know you guys had a lot of questions for Mac before us about kombucha leather and about coffee grounds and stuff like that and how they can be used. That's what we're being paid to kind of prototype. Yeah, Matt has a sample of our kombucha leather there, which is just a super simple way of, we just took the SCOBY from the kombucha and just dried it out and covered it in beeswax, and it really produced. That's the sample that Matt has in his hands there. It's a year and a half old almost, so it's really proving quite sturdy, even though it's so low tech, as it were. And so we're really excited about that. And then we've also been able to create some biocomposites using coffee grounds as well, which you can see on our website if you're curious, or on Materium's material library as well. And our last ongoing project, just to finish these bases, is called our African Circularity Database, which I think we've touched on briefly. But essentially, we built this database to create a more open source reflection of what's ongoing in circularity on the African continent. And there are many other databases as well, but a lot of them are closed off. And so kind of, because one of our founding principles is that we focus on open source and open access, we provided this this table, which is embedded on our website, as well as a form for submission for circularity projects, really, which have quite a significant range. So we go pretty much as far back as one of the projects that we have is a project that I'll speak about soon, but comes from the 1600s and is ongoing. It's an ongoing practice and kind of is reflective of the potential of circularity on the continent, all the way up until a really small startup in Johannesburg that doesn't have legs yet, but they're working on circularity. And so, yeah, from that we'll move on to our other conversations, which are more about the stories that come out outside of our work and more related to people like the informal reclaimer, who you can see now. I know some of you guys were curious about how little they're paid, but that's if you can see how much he's carrying, that is also what's so mind-blowing, is that that's a kind of daily occurrence for their work and their practice, and how much impact just one person can have on a daily level in a city like Johannesburg.
Great. So we're going to sort of hone in a bit now, looking at circular design and the circular economy in the Johannesburg context, because that's sort of where our base is, and what we're seeing day to day and how that sort of influences our thinking. And so what makes Joburg such an interesting base? It's a complex city. It's got a lot of sort of informal contributors to the circular economy. One of which is what we've already spoken about, the waste reclaimers, who save the government an estimated 750 million rand a year on landfill space, which I did do the conversion, is 43 million euros. You can convert that to krona, sorry.
It's about the same in krona, 750 million.
And then another interesting thing, to save time, we'll just move on a bit, is we feel like Johannesburg has a pretty interesting vocabulary of repair. So there's shoe or bag repairers visible on a street corner in most communities. And this is a very interesting thing for me personally, but also speaks to a broader idea about valuing material out of sort of very many reasons, but one of them will be out of necessity, not being able to potentially buy new shoes. Another one will be wanting to keep those shoes because of sentimental value. But it's quite interesting that this repair economy can be maintained and is almost, it almost becomes well, it is actually a sort of exchangeable skill for money. Does that make sense? Kiera, is there anything you want to add on this one?
Yeah, just that there's this exchangeability of skills and this willingness to participate in something that's not structured is kind of what makes this a really really interesting base, as Matt said already. But yeah, just to build a little bit on that and what we've spoken about already is this reflection on maybe a little bit about what makes Africa not unique, but because some of these cultures are still able to exist despite the colonization that occurred on the continent, there is still this significant presence of traditional ecological knowledge. And in response to that, in response to decolonization, radical indigenism, which looks at how we can resuscitate and preserve these cleaner, greener ways of thinking. And so kind of one of my favorite examples, which is from the Gomvi, which is what is now known as Ghana, it's the Tofino people, which in the 16th century, from the 16th century onwards, habitated on this lake. And basically, you know, much like we know in Denmark and Sweden, they live on stilts, but in this version, they live on stilts in the water. And they created these kind of almost like mangrove, which are a type of tree. They mimicked these mangrove swamps to provide a way for them to farm not only fish, but also create algal systems and new ecosystems in order to provide higher quality soil and higher quality nutrients for the people living around the lake, as well as the people living inside the lake. So essentially they created these stilted cities almost, where they created fishing areas, man-made fishing areas that were more advanced than what we now call aquaculture or fish farms or whatever we call them now. The ones that exist in this space are much more advanced and much more resilient than what we have now. And so what they've been able to create in Benin, that now people are looking at ways to mimic that in a much more, because they've created such a low impact system, if there's a way for us to create fish farms or to create aquaculture in a symbiotic way with nature, this is kind of what the Tofinu people were able to develop so many years ago, 400 years ago. And so it's kind of looking back to how radical indigenism can inform our new ways of circular design.
Another really interesting sort of example of this is the Kiamba Forest Gardens. These are in what is now known as Tanzania. It's been a sort of a system that's existed for a very long time, but it's this idea that is very interesting going forward as we design sort of urban centers around potentially, areas that have a need for growth and sort of natural biodiversity. It's this idea of sort of natural symbiosis of both the forest and what's needed to be grown for human consumption. So the classic example of like growing crops would be removing the forest and then growing a monoculture crop. And this system says, well, we don't want to do that. We want to grow both in sort of symbiosis, and therefore create a really interesting biodiverse system that sort of protects itself. Obviously, it needs human protection and policy around that, but it's very interesting idea for going forward as in society is how can we create that symbiosis between our agriculture as well as our sort of climate and the natural biodiversity. So moving on to Kiera.
Yeah, so this kind of culminates, these two examples and what Matt and I touched on previously kind of culminate in this idea of what we determine as creative scientists. And I think that much of the inspiration for this term really comes from indigenous communities, where the formation of that term for us is really rooted in the idea of being able to observe what's going on around you and take it all in and process that in a meaningful way that comes up with solutions. It's not about snap responses, but it's about taking time to kind of learn and adapt to what's going on around you. So even though this example on the screen at the moment isn't it's not an example from the African continent, it's actually from the southwest of North America, from the Ute people. But it's this idea of adobe gardens, where the desertification of their land happened so swiftly, which is happening across the world now. But they were able to notice that with the desertification of their land came a prolific number of floods. So like, even though the rainfall became less frequent, the flooding became more prominent because the land almost was unable to cope. And so they developed this type of gardening, which are called adobe gardens, as you can see here, where they created this grid system. So when the floods came, they were able to hold the water for the seedlings, and the seedlings then would be able to nourish themselves as the sun kind of came and went, nourish themselves over time. And it meant that even though they lived in drought areas, they were able to create a landscape that was still hospitable to their life and still in line with the environment around them, and still, you know, holding on to the idea that they shouldn't be harming or over farming, but rather creating a response that was more appropriate, rather than what has happened now is that they've essentially built all these, I'm not sure if you guys know, but they've built these massive false rivers through the American Southwest in order to provide for the fact that there's no water, there's no natural water. And so that's led to a much bigger problem than if people kind of just took the time and reflected on what's going wrong. You can actually see that there's a more responsive and ecologically sound solution than just kind of bulldozing through. And so that's kind of what we see as creative scientists, is that you're problem solving and you're taking time while you do something.
So as we sort of keep going through these stories of circularity that we feel will influence decision making in the future as designers, and things that we should be referencing in our way of thinking, we're going to look at a couple of the examples from our African Circularity Database and sort of just pull out some key terms that we found really interesting from that. So from Ghana, we have the Swami magazine cluster, and this is an example of repair or remanufacture on a large scale. Remanufacture has become a bit of a buzzword in circular design at the moment. I know Volvo are trying to create a fully circular system using remanufacture. They have, I think it's 2,000 parts coming from 1,000 different suppliers, if I'm not mistaken. So they're trying to see how they can keep their parts in production rather than them being sort of like thrown away or scrapped after the car is no longer in use. So reclaiming elements of the car is something that like Volvo would involve remanufacture with, but it could be sort of like used by any design process. But this the Swami magazine cluster it has about 200,000 workers in the area. It's a sort of informal group of small businesses that look at, I mean, it is in a formalized industrial area, but it's sort of grown almost organically. And it's sort of over the decades sort of grown into this massive heaving repair space, which is such an interesting way of looking at how material moves. So if we can think of it as like a localized repair point, which if every sort of country or community had an area like this, we would waste far less materials. So that's where it sort of enters into the circular debate, keeping material in the product loop for it to be used again and again. Yeah.
Yeah, so our second case study is something that's kind of near and dear to us. It's this organization here in Johannesburg called Love Our City Clean. And they are someone that we partner with fairly frequently because they've created this quite an innovative approach, at least in Johannesburg. We don't know of anyone else who's doing it, approach to waste management and waste reclamation, in that they offer, it's almost like it's a buyback center, but it's with the idea, with a decentralized model. So looking at saying, if you bring in, just as anyone off the street, if you bring in a bag of Coca-Cola bottles or whatever, plastic Coca-Cola bottles, you'll be able to exchange that for a bottle of dish soap or something that's useful in your home, basically, for whether it's food or a home utility. And this is really focused on the community level. And then from that exchange system, they're also able to create a series of workshops with different communities and different apartment buildings across the main city center in Johannesburg, where they educate people about not just recycling, but also things like composting, how important plant life is, and just really diversifying the knowledge in this community space in a way that's communicable and understandable to people that don't always have the time or capacity to spend time learning these things. It's really time consuming, even for me, to understand how the recycling system works. So they really condense this information into a way that people can understand how significant of an impact it can have in their own lives as well. Next slide, Maddie.
Great.
And then something that I really love from slightly north of here in Uganda is this, her name's Dr. Emma Naluyima, and she has an incredible TED Talk by the same name, which is called A Profitable 1 Acre Farm. And what she focuses on is this idea of regenerative agriculture, but at an entirely tiny scale, comparably to what we normally consider as regenerative agriculture. So she looks at, on her 1 acre plot of land in Uganda, how she can continuously crop rotate, how she continuously move the nutrients from her pigs to her chickens to her worms, and then create this ongoing scale of profitability throughout the seasons, where sometimes she'll be selling plantains, which she's farming in this picture. Sometimes she'll be selling corn. Sometimes she'll be selling, I think even rice she can sell. But she's done it at a scale which is much more meaningful to the broader African context, because there are so many 1 acre farmers in the world. I think it's something like there's, I might be really scrapping this number, but I think it's something like there's 500 million 1 acre farmers in the world. And so developing this model of a meaningful transition to regenerative farming that doesn't require hooved animals in the same way, but can still support someone, I think is really significant and prevalent if we're speaking about circularity.
Another interesting example that's sort of less practical but more information based and tactical, I guess, is the Circular Design Nairobi. This is a design studio that looks to maximize the community's resources through circular design. If anyone's interested in circular design and doesn't know about the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, that's a really good resource to start sort of learning from. But essentially what a company like Circular Design Nairobi will do is look at specific nuanced problems and with knowledge of the area and with community engagement and co-creation, create systems that are, basically solve the issues for that space. I think far too often we see problems as sort of non-geographic or non-context specific. So one solution in say Kenya might not necessarily work in Tanzania. And think projects that have like massively resource intensive in terms of like, potentially manufacturing a solution to, say, water shortage might work in one area, but it doesn't work in another area. So the idea of having smaller hubs of circular design systems is really interesting to us. And this group is doing it really interestingly to tackle the nuanced tasks that surround them. The idea that everybody can be a designer because everybody is a problem solver is also really interesting. So what is a designer? The idea of including the entire community of designers into the conversation is also a very interesting space.
So this is an example that is, kind of grips me quite often. If you guys want someone great to follow on Instagram, Afrogallinism is one of them. It's a concept run by artists whose name is Sergei Kloti. And he's been working with this project for 17 years. And essentially what he has done is taken essentially these one gallon jugs with which often you find petrol in or cooking oil or whatever. And he's recreated them into an art form. And so he has a whole team of people who work with them, and he's able to employ them through the system. But what they do is they cut up these jugs, these big jugs, and they turn them into what you can see here, which is essentially like this massive carpet that covers these informal settlements. Or he creates these face-like objects, which you can see that he's sitting on here at the beach. And he's created this kind of like artistic and circular response to Western aid and colonization through these jugs by creating a critique over how they end up here and why they remain in Africa and why they remain in Ghana, and essentially, created also on top of that a whole economy over the value of these jugs at a small scale in Ghana, but at a global scale in terms of how valuable his art is as well. And it's really opened up a really important conversation about reuse of materials as a form of artistic expression, but also social expression and social engagement, and how significant that kind of engagement with material as a waste form can be.
And sort of finally, and it sort of strikes a chord with what I said earlier, is the idea of shoe repair. And localized repair or maintenance. I won't go into too much detail, but this image just shows the sort of the low-tech way that footwear is repaired sort of on this side of the street. And it's a really interesting way of sort of localizing that process using hand tools, using very, very skilled sort of labor to repair different things in different ways. I've had many shoes repaired, and it's really interesting to see how my shoe repairer Stevie, and from my community, he sort of tackles different tasks with regards to like recoloring things or fixing the sole or adding a new sole onto shoes. And that's a really interesting way of looking at sort of the repair cycle, but how can designers and footwear manufacturers incorporate repair into their designs, so that when Stevie's working on the shoe itself, maybe it's a little bit easier to repair, or there's it's thought out that the sole can be replaced by someone like him. So yeah, so I guess I don't know how relevant this will be, but let's try it. If you want to just answer in the chat or raise your hand, I don't know if anyone can speak here, but are there any practices of circularity that we've mentioned that sort of strike a chord for you, that are recognizable in your hometown, whether it's something you sort of witnessed when you're growing up or something that you see on a day-to-day basis? And if using these sort of things, either localized repair, reuse as a form of artistic expression, community-led waste reclamation, cultures of repair, remanufacture, resource efficiency. If you just write a quick little answer about something that's happening in your own town, it might be interesting for us. Yeah, and the idea that we're sort of trying to propose here, and it's not just us, a lot of people are doing this, but circularity is all around us. And a large part of the innovations that we're going to need going forward will stem from systems and knowledge that already exists. It struck me when I went with a cohort of 10 African designers to London that a lot of the stuff we were seeing had these like really interesting buzzwords, and the realization was that a lot of these things are happening back home. We just aren't framing them as important as they should be. So that was a very interesting realization. But yeah, hopefully like we can tell these stories and it can inspire people across the world to come up with new solutions in areas like agriculture and design and building. Yeah, and if you know any interesting and cool projects happening on the African continent, please feel free to go and add them on our African Circularity Database at this website, link over there at the bottom. Yeah, and I think Kiera will just end us off with this thought.
Yeah, just to finish up on what Matt was saying, that it's also, you know, it's also, if you want to share anything for ideas, we'd also appreciate that. But kind of what we culminate this webinar in is that in the African context, the lack of regulation of how people choose or chose to organize and respond to environmental challenges creates a really fertile ground for grassroots creative exploration. And so essentially, you know, you're allowing community building and community engagement to foster in a really unique and organic way that I think isn't always possible in the rest of the world because of you know, the involvement of industry and other components. And so there's a lot of really interesting space for circular innovation in South Africa and in the rest of the continent, especially.
Thank you.
Amazing. I really like this, how you basically went from showing the different projects, and I actually now really see how it works because I knew about your hybrid part lab part studio. Now I really understand what you do and actually the broad range of activities. That was a super cool presentation, and I'll just jump into some of the questions that were posed while you guys were presenting. So if we, one question by Maria was, is it possible to bring back radical indigenism and scale it? I mean, in the context of our current linear economy.
Yeah, Matt, if you don't mind, I take this. I think that maybe the concept of radical indigenism is scalable, but the solutions that radical indigenism proposes aren't, because they're so rooted in what's going on in your actual physical context. I think we didn't speak about it much, but my like biggest book recommendation ever would be this book called Low Tech, Designed by Radical Indigenism by Dr. Julia Watson. And she kind of suggests this way that the term and the thinking mechanism of radical indigenism totally should be spread wider, but the actual solutions that are proposed in each environment or each response to an environment are actually so unique that you can't scale them elsewhere. She speaks about how, for instance, in Indonesia, there was an indigenous response to the rising tides and stuff, but the Jakartan government brought in people from Denmark. No, not from Denmark, I think it was from Holland, who had built these diking systems because of how low underwater Holland is. And basically they brought them to Jakarta, but to build these systems, they'll only be completed 25 years after Jakarta is projected to be underwater. So it's the fact that we have these like, you know, colonial responses to these things, but in reality, we should try and make them more contextual. Sorry, Maria, I will put that in the chat now. I'll send you a link.
Yes, I think I see why you say that the mentality can be spread all over, but the solutions must be rooted in the local context, therefore are not just transferable. So there was a question in relation to this sort of like bioplastic. So regarding the bioplastic, what measurement you have for the efficiency of each biomaterial recipe?
I'll take that one. It's interesting. We're sort of developing the processes as we go, but at the moment we have an input form that we're basically tracking all the sort of elements that the variables that go into each test. So the mold time, what the recipe was, you know, how much drying time the material had, and then once we've got a successful cast, we'll start with a series of tests. So we'll look at pH level of the material, we'll look at humidity in the room, so we understand the sort of the control of what we're doing. And then we'll look at things like whether it's heat resistance, whether it can hold water. We just did a very interesting test with wood ash. We made a wood ash cup and rehydrated it, and it was able to hold water for up to 2 weeks, which is very interesting and sort of kept its shape. So we'll do tests like that, make notes as we're going. This project is quite new, so we're very much in like the machine building stage and getting our processes going. And so there are a couple of kinks that we're working out in the process. But yeah, a variety of things. We'll look at sort of tensile strength. We're partnering with a South African-based bio material manufacturer who's based just down the road from us, and he's got a more sort of scientific approach to testing materials, so he can come in and consult in terms of like looking at specific characteristics of materials to potentially scale up, and whether or not they can be manufactured efficiently, and if things need to be food grade, if they can be. So that would be the process.
And just generally, both of you can answer, like either Mac from Kombuccino or you guys. But I was thinking, in general, it seems that that business model or clusters that deal with circularity, when they do part from some sort of like a biomaterial input, they seem to be much easily scalable and more circular. Is this a misconception, or is this really how it is? On one hand, it might seem easier to make these biocircular models, but on the other hand, there is a whole other dimension of science and logistics that need to accompany that. So can you give us your thoughts on this? Like, is it really easier to do circularity with a bio input than it is with a non-bio input?
And look, I'm not an expert on this. Maybe Mac as a person who runs Matt, for what it's worth, Big Circle is a not-for-profit, so our scalability models are slightly different. But for what it's worth, I studied philosophy. I don't have actually any engagement with chemistry at all from beyond high school. So I think that actually engaging with these materials in a meaningful way, that's something that's really it can be self-taught. You can learn it it takes time, but you can learn it and you can engage with it in a meaningful way quite quickly, and that can lead to scalability. But I think maybe Mac is more might have more astute observations.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, yeah, because implementing those solutions, it requires a change in mindset. I actually answered one of these questions here in the chat about it as well, that sometimes the change, or how we approach the change, is we're scared of implementing those solutions, because in our heads, it's like admitting that the current system is wrong, that there's something wrong about what we're doing these days. And it requires courage from it, and also it involves every single person involved in the project or the organization. So it's not only that I have an idea of we're gonna make it more circular or more sustainable, it's about making everybody on board to the idea and making sure that they stand for the mission. It doesn't necessarily answer your question directly, but I think it's important to remember that it takes a lot of effort, and it all starts in our heads. Just.
Yeah, if I can just add to what both Kiera and Mac have said, like the idea of open source information means that access to more people means that more people are going to be testing within their own spaces, going to be tinkering and experimenting and being inspired. I think that's one of the things that will push us further into this, to a more circular space, is young people seeing like biomaterials or fermentation as like a sexy thing, you know, something that's necessary as we move forward. And through that, there has to be innovation as more people start to engage with these things in their own spaces, as people start to pursue businesses with them and innovate. I think naturally humans are quite innovative when it comes to these things. So that's why it's so important for open source information to be available, so that, you know, everyone can access that.
Definitely. That's a very key component, transparency and disseminating as much information as we possibly can. But I think we ran a little bit over time, so I will unfortunately have to stop it here. But I really want to thank you guys for the two groups of speakers for really giving us these very nice presentations and so many insights into these circular stories. I think it was super insightful, and a lot of these lessons that you taught us today can be really extrapolated, and we can carry on with us when we go out there. So thank you very much, Mag and Matthew and Kiera, for your time and your amazing presentations.
Thanks,
It's our
everyone, for
pleasure.
listening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.